Indro Montanelli, an astrological portrait by Ciro Discepolo, published in the monthly magazine Astra in 1978 and then in 1979 in the book Gli astri del successo, The Stars of Success, published by Armenia. The sun sign is Taurus, the ascendant is in Scorpio, and the moon is in Gemini. The first fundamental element of the personality under examination is concreteness, linked to the values of Taurus, Sun, Mercury, and Venus, Virgo, stellium in the sixth house, and the Sun-Mercury conjunction. This is an upstream concreteness, that is, a mental disposition that leads the individual to grasp the practical side of things first. By virtue of this characteristic, he or she tends to always choose what can be controlled, verified, and managed. The centrifugal flights of the imagination, the castles in the air, the dark paths of oblivion, the soothing torpor of fantasy are all planets, millions of light years away from his psychology, which instead aspires to always keep its feet firmly on the ground. No program, short or long-term, no project, small or large, is considered unless it presents from the outset a precise purpose. This concreteness is accompanied, in his case, by a decidedly positive image he has of himself and his abilities. It is not a question of brazen presumption, but rather of a natural self-assurance that can easily be perceived as presumption. The union of these two primary and important parameters of his psychology leads to a third, equally qualifying element: obstinacy. I speak of obstinacy and not simply of continuity or perseverance, because here we are faced with something more intense. Indeed, perseverance, when supported by even a modest dose of presumption and belonging to an essentially psychologically balanced individual, tends to easily become tinged with dogmatism. The individual, who also possesses very few water values, and is therefore very little influenced by either emotional or rational pressure, tends to firmly defend his opinions. Naturally, the level of inner maturity he has achieved, which I don't know and therefore can't comment on, may mitigate this weakness, suggesting greater openness to the ideas of others. Regarding the temporal dimension, his psychology appears predominantly oriented toward the past. This doesn't justify simplistically placing him in the conservative category, but it helps us understand the extremely high regard he has for experience. He tends to continually ruminate on the events of his life to draw lessons from them that will be useful for the future. I said earlier that the subject is essentially healthy from a psychological standpoint, and I use the adverb substantially because he too presents his own psychological micropathology, which I will now illustrate. Like Sigmund Freud, he is characterized by the Taurus-Scorpio axis, Sun ascendant, which André Barbeau defines as oral-anal. The two signs establish a polar and symbolic connection between assimilative values, the mouth, the throat, Taurus, and expulsive values, destruction, the anus, Scorpio. It is the dynamic of eros and thanatos, of life and death, of instinct and repression, which inevitably produces an underlying neurosis. In our case, we find a vital impulse, or to use Freudian terminology, a particularly intense libido, which longs to manifest itself forcefully, but must continually contend with severe self-repression. Considering the chart as a whole, it seems reasonable to assume that the subject still retains many traces of an oral complex developed in childhood. This results in a marked greed, capable of manifesting itself in a variety of ways: greed for food, knowledge, prestige, affection, or money, in other words, the Midas complex transposed to any plane of existence. The chart as a whole also suggests a hard worker, driven by an ambition that may be openly declared or carefully concealed. Not knowing the subject personally, I have no information about his relationship with sexuality, a particularly prominent theme in his horoscope. If he's lived his sexuality naturally, then he's expressed himself in full harmony with the astrological values of his birth chart. The Sun conjunct Venus and trine Jupiter indicate a spontaneous disposition to love and be loved. If, however, this energy has been sublimated, the ninth house dispositor in the seventh suggests that he may have married a faith, then Saturn in the fifth house could indicate frustrations or renunciations in the sexual sphere. The moon in Gemini lends the overall impression a touch of superficiality, which, far from being a flaw, serves a balancing function. It softens the character's sharper edges, softens its contours, and introduces element of intellectual curiosity, versatility, encyclopedic knowledge, and youthfulness. It is also a factor that often causes the individual to appear younger than they actually are. The trine between Mars in Aquarius and the Moon indicates a natural predisposition to ideological battles. To conclude, I would say that the individual, despite the clarifications and reservations already mentioned, largely corresponds to the type that André Barbeau defines as hot dominant, analogous to the image of the bull in the arena, expansive, sanguine, hyper-emotional, optimistic, easily excitable, subject to even dangerous outbursts of anger, prone to exaggeration and not always in control of their instincts.